Welcome once again to another edition of Digging the Details with Jim and Dean. And I'd like to introduce Dean Brinkerhoff, who is a wonderful Disney historian, writer, artist, and enthusiast. And he's bringing all that to the table. Hey, Dean, how are you doing tonight?
Hey Jim, excellent. How are you doing tonight?
Good. It's great to see you, as always.
Yes, of course. And I'd like to introduce you as well. Jim Fanning, you are an incredible author, writer, Disney historian, and beyond, historian of all things pop culture. And it's a thrill to be back here on Tulgeywood TV tonight.
Thank you, John Darling. And tonight we are going to talk about Walt Disney's Peter Pan, released in 1953. So this year we are celebrating its 70th anniversary. So we thought this would be a good time to talk about it, and also a great part of the Disney 100 celebration. Because as everyone knows, Peter Pan is a central animated feature in the whole Disney canon. So we're just going to talk about some things that intrigue us, and hopefully they'll intrigue you as well.
Jim, I liked what you said about Peter Pan being a very intriguing film. I agree that it's that and so much more. Peter Pan was the Disney Studios' 14th animated feature. Of all the Disney animated features, I can easily consider Peter Pan to be in my top five. I don't have that specific ranking ready to go, but I definitely consider it to be a movie that I can rewatch over and over, and it still feels fresh, it feels new. And I may have said this in the past in one of our videos, but Peter Pan truly has that magical rewatch quality. And for me, it just, I think, stems from the passion that the artists and filmmakers really poured into Peter Pan. Walt Disney is quoted as saying that there wasn't enough heart, in his opinion, in Alice in Wonderland, so that they really tried to go the extra mile with Peter Pan and infuse a lot of heart and a lot of meaningful moments. And I think that really is apparent in the way that the children interact and the way Peter interacts with the children, everybody together, and the way the family comes together in the end as well. Not to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen Peter Pan, but if you haven't seen Peter Pan, what are you doing with your life? And Peter Pan was extremely important to Walt Disney, being one of his favorite stories next to Snow White. In fact, he wanted to create Peter Pan as an animated feature long before they finally did it. But due to getting the rights to the stories and everything, it took a few years. But I'm glad that it did in a way. They were able to hone their craft and really present Peter Pan in really one of the best eras of Disney, in my opinion, the 1950s. So, all that being said, I just wanted to share a quick quote from Walt Disney where he says, "All of the characters in Peter Pan are in some way touched with magic. They exist only in the land of fable and can be brought to life in pictures only through the arts of animation." And I think that was a goal he really tried to bring about, was doing the ultimate version of Peter Pan. There's been many versions of Peter Pan done on the stage, in writing, in oral form, but I think he really wanted to portray the best possible version, especially in his own eyes. And I truly think that in a way he's accomplished that. I mean, you can always argue that something like this wouldn't be as good as the original source material, but in my opinion, when I think of Peter Pan, I think of the Walt Disney version. So in that way, I think he did seek out and succeed what he wanted to do.
I think it's the ultimate version as well. There's the funny story that Frank Thomas told about Walt Disney being in London when Peter Pan was originally in release, and he was walking down the street behind two women, and he overheard the women saying to each other, "Oh," because they were passing a theater where Walt Disney's Peter Pan was playing, and one said to the other, "Have you seen it yet?" And the other one said, "No, I haven't, but I hear it's terribly Americanized." And because remember, of course, this was a British story.
Absolutely.
And the other woman said, "Yes, it is, but you don't notice it so much when you're watching it." Right? But that's a reminder that it's a British story. But by the time Walt Disney's Peter Pan was produced, there had already been one Broadway play on an adaptation of the original play. And then the same year came out the famous Mary Martin version, well, what we think of as the Mary Martin version, was produced the same year. So Americans were already used to different interpretations of the Peter Pan story.
Right.
So and since then there's been many other versions. There's one with Mia Farrow and Danny Kaye as Captain Hook. There's the and of course right now there's the new Disney live action version called Peter Pan and Wendy. So another Disney interpretation now. First of all, Walt Disney always did his own interpretation. Pinocchio, for example, is vastly changed from the original book, vastly.
Right.
And there's so many elements, but one thing that's amazing about it, to your point about where the art of animation, the art of Disney animation was in the 1950s, is that it had always been something of a challenge to really animate human characters. And this story has almost nothing but human characters. Even Tinkerbell is a human character, even though she's only, this high. So
Right.
they everything seems so effortless. There's little kids, there's there's the parents, there's Captain Hook and Mr. Smee, and then other caricature characters. There's humans left and right. And it all seems so effortless. And I think that's the great thing about the Disney versions always, is they always have the exact right touch. Something you said earlier made me think about Peter Pan himself. When Peter Pan, as it was being developed, I mean the original by James M. Barrie, there was no Captain Hook at first. And Peter Pan himself was quite the thoughtless, almost cruel, although not intentionally, character, because he's supposed to be this kid that doesn't grow up. Well, the emphasis was on how thoughtless children can be, because they're still developing their empathy and their, care for others. And also, he lives in the jungle basically, so he's a primitive. So he thinks, and he's quite boastful and all this. This is much more emphasized in the original. Then when James Barrie added Captain Hook, well, a villain helps the hero seem more heroic.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one reason he did add Captain Hook, to make Peter less, well, let's just say more heroic, as I said. Disney emphasized those qualities more, although you can still see his thoughtlessness. He doesn't even notice that Tinkerbell is jealous. He doesn't even notice Wendy's feelings about some of the things that he says. And when the mermaids are kind of attacking her, as it were, he's laughing. He's not helping her.
He's finding the humor in the situation more than, oh, well, maybe I should help her.
Yeah, he's not even thinking about that. And in the world that he lives in, he doesn't really need to. It's a primitive world, and it's just him and those
Right.
Lost Boys. But at any rate, the point being, the story adaptation is very carefully done, and Walt Disney and his team really analyze, well, what was in the original, and how can we make that more. The original also has a great, well, see, again, it's confusing, because the original play is not what people think of. They think of the Mary Martin version. That's not the original. That's an adaptation of the original. Although the Mary Martin version, she's much more boastful and self-centered than the Disney version. But at any rate, I think they looked at it and said, well, we don't want to go that far. But what I was going to say is there's a great poignancy and a sadness to the original, even though there's lots of humor and lots of adventure. Disney has exactly the right approach to all those things, I think. I like that approach, where all that sort of thing is touched upon. But it's even to the point where there's the famous scene where at the end, where Peter comes back to the Darling family home, and now Wendy is grown up. And he doesn't even really, he doesn't understand that at all. And she has a great sadness that she can't go back to Neverland. So that little thing at the end is always so sad to me. Whereas the Disney version handles that in a completely different way. It doesn't handle that at all. In fact, the whole thing, did it really happen? Or was it just her dream? And then it's all projected onto Mr. Darling.
Right.
And that's a very Disney thing, that it's not about the sadness of it. It's about he reawakens to the wonder of his childhood that he can tap into any time now that he remembers he's seen that pirate ship long, long ago. And that's the happy ending.
Right. It's beautiful.
Yeah, so there were other changes. This was the first time that Peter Pan was portrayed by he is a boy, but on stage he'd always been portrayed as a woman. And of course, that used to be more of a convention where child characters, especially leads, would be portrayed by a woman portraying a boy. Well, think about it. How could you really have an 11-year-old boy play the lead character in a big, big production, 8 times a week?
Right.
No child would be capable of that. That's one reason. And it's sort of the delight of the stage version and sort of the fun that you would have. Jean Arthur was in the original Broadway version, the one before the Mary Martin one. Well, people wanted to see. And guess who played Captain Hook in the Jean Arthur version on Broadway?
Who?
Boris Karloff.
Wow.
So it's, all of that's just fun. But Walt Disney, of course, said, well, he's a boy, not a woman. We're portraying him in animation, so we can do anything we want. We don't have to worry about a stage live performance. So we're going to portray him as a boy. I was thinking, Tom Holland could have played Peter Pan if they did a production of it when he was like 11 or 12, because he was on stage. His first claim to fame was as Billy Elliot in the stage version in London. And he's a dancer and he's an athlete.
He probably would have been perfect for the role.
Yeah. Now, I don't think he or any child could do, 8 performances a week. There were other Billy Elliots too. So even when he was playing Billy Elliot, he didn't play it every single time. But at any rate, I thought that would be really cool if he had done that. And he could have done the flying and everything.
Yeah. He certainly flies around the city in Spider-Man.
There you go. But at any rate, other conventions that Disney did differently than the stage was Nana is a dog. She's not somebody in a dog costume. The crocodile is a crocodile. It's not somebody in a crocodile costume. And perhaps most significantly of all, Tinkerbell is not a little ball of light that darts around the stage. She's a fully realized, beautifully done character animated by Mark Davis and designed by Mark Davis. So that's one reason that Tinkerbell, I think, became so huge a star, because people had always been fascinated by her, but now you could actually see her face and how her reactions and all her movements and her wings. It's just the ultimate in the art of animation.
And Tinkerbell certainly went through a lot of long development in her character design and the look of her face and all that. And Mark Davis really honed in and brought something to life that was so iconic and so beautiful. I mean, everybody knows who Tinkerbell is, and she's outlived Peter Pan to be one of Disney's most iconic. I already used this word, but she's an icon. She really is.
Yeah, I think part of it was the timing, because 53, and then in 1954, Walt Disney moved into weekly television, and he was a little leery about using Mickey Mouse. So he just thought, well, with Tinkerbell's great freedom, she's a pixie, so she can be anywhere, she can go anywhere. And he also gave her magical powers with her wand that she doesn't have in Peter Pan. So she can conjure up whatever she wants. So she became the symbol of the TV show. And then same thing with Disneyland in 1955. Again, Walt was reluctant to use Mickey Mouse as the symbol of Disneyland. So Tinkerbell became the symbol of Disneyland. Would that have happened if Tinkerbell had been created in a different year? I don't know.
That's true. I was only going to say that she's represented very, very upfront on a lot of the early park maps and park ads and things like that that were out to get the word out about Disneyland. So you really can see how much Walt was trying to utilize her as a character.
Yes, and she's specifically a magical character, so she's a great symbol of Disney magic. So the Magic Kingdom, the Disneyland TV show, it all fits together.
Yeah,
and she's delightful.
Certainly is.
It's another thing that people are, I think, a little surprised about when they sit down and watch Peter Pan, because again, James M. Barrie introduced a lot of adventure and action and a lot of characters that he thought represented childhood or would appeal to children. And in his mind, sort of the bloodthirsty nature of the action adventure, he's like, well, that's the way kids are. They're bloodthirsty. They want action. So Tinkerbell is kind of a bloodthirsty, to use a very strong term, she's kind of a bloodthirsty character. She's all about her emotions, talking about in the film. She's all about her emotions, and she actively tries to kill Wendy.
Right.
And she's that jealous and that primitive, if you will, when it comes to her emotions. And she almost ends up killing Peter Pan because she allows her emotions to overtake her to the point where Captain Hook can manipulate her.
Right.
He's lying to her and tricking her, but it's her emotions that got her there in the first place. And he's playing upon her emotions to reveal his hiding place. I think your understanding is she goes through more of an arc, as they say nowadays, than Peter Pan himself does. She's the one that realizes she was wrong, and she luckily ends up escaping and helping Peter Pan, saving his life. And then Tinkerbell helps him save the lives of all the kids too.
Yeah, I've always really enjoyed the fantasy aspect and the wonder of this story, all the places you can go to on this island of Neverland. As a kid, I was about 7 years old when the sequel to Peter Pan came out, and so Peter Pan was kind of all a buzz and a big hype at the time. And naturally, I grew up with the original Peter Pan as well, but they went hand in hand in our household. So me and my sisters often would pretend we had, we'd make like a pillow fort and we'd pretend it was Peter Pan's treehouse. And I loved just the vivid image of walking through the treehouse and looking up, and there's water above you with fish swimming around, and it just is so perfectly encapsulates the childhood wonder and fantasy that I experienced and so many other children do as well.
And I think you even wore a Peter Pan hat at Disneyland, didn't you, when you were a little kid? Maybe this around the same time.
I may have been seen at Disneyland walking around with one, yes.
Which I love, because those Peter Pan hats are great. Anybody can wear a Mickey Mouse hat. Take somebody special to wear a Peter Pan hat.
Well, it's funny you mention it. I did grow up with a personalized Mickey Mouse Club cap, but by the time I was about 7 years old, like I said, and went to Disneyland, I was Peter Pan crazy. So, as soon as I saw one of those hats, I went straight for that and proudly wore it around. And especially going on the Peter Pan's flight attraction, that's a core memory, wearing that hat and the cast members calling me Peter Pan and welcoming me back to Neverland. That was something I'll never forget.
That's so great.
I truly felt like I was Peter Pan that day.
Oh, I love that story. I really love your pointing out the fantasy of the underground hideout of Peter Pan. So much of that we have to thank Mary Blair for, in her wonderful imagining and her pre-production art. And the funny thing is it goes by so fast. When you brought that up, I was like, okay, how many people would even think to bring that up? The different aspects. It's really just zoom, zoom, zoom. They're in, and that's shown like twice or maybe 3 times. But it makes me think that's one thing amazing about the Peter Pan story in the first place, which undoubtedly is what appealed to Walt Disney. It's nonstop fantasy. It just at every turn, at every corner, something amazing is happening, just left and right. Even in the Darling family home at the
Absolutely.
beginning, there's Nana. There's a fantasy element where this dog is the nursemaid, and she's doling out medicine and straightening up and housekeeping.
It's a bit surreal and absurd, but I think it works very well.
Yeah, it's fantastic right off the bat. So then when we get into Peter Pan himself and his shadow that he's lost, and then they fly off to Neverland, oh my gosh, it's just non-stop everywhere you look and turn. And the Disney animators, of course, do it perfectly. But one thing I wanted to bring up is this is the last animated feature that incorporated the talents of all 9 of the 9 old men. And really, it's one of the few, because most Disney animated features didn't include all 9 of the 9 old men anyhow. In the 50s, as you stated, a new golden age. It was the time of these masters. And then again, we're getting into television, we're getting into different things. So some of them started to go off in different directions. Ward Kimball certainly went in the direction of television, for example.
Right.
Mark Davis ultimately went to Imagineering. That's one reason when I was very lucky to help curate this Walt Disney's 9 Old Men membership kit for D23. And I knew we had to have something very significant for Peter Pan because, again, all 9 of them worked on the film. So we not only had this animation drawing by Frank Thomas of Captain Hook, the animation drawings in this, I didn't have anything to do with. That all came from the Animation Research Library. People like Fox Carney and Doug Angalia would have been very involved in the choosing of that. I helped pick out the other things. So I thought, well, what could better represent it than this fantastic fan card? And as far as we know, the 9 Old Men didn't have anything to do with this, but of course they did, because they came up with these characters, the designs. Milt Kahl was the one, of course, who was the master animator of Peter Pan, for example. So he would have finalized the design, and here it is. I don't think we know for sure who did this art. It may very well have been John Hench, but at any rate, that's why I suggested this to represent the whole Peter Pan film.
Excellent choice.
Thank you. Well, we had mentioned earlier that Peter Pan was released in 1953 and Disneyland opened in 1955. I think you were going to talk about some of the Disneyland representations of Peter Pan, aside from your hat.
Well, there's nothing more important than that. By the way, if anyone finds a personalized Dean Peter Pan hat out there somewhere, I lost it, so I'd like it back.
Did you lose it at Disneyland?
No, sadly, it was thrown away in a purge or donated in a purge.
Uh-oh.
That's how life goes sometimes.
At least you've got your green Peter Pan shirt.
I'm so fly, but because I never land. Disneyland definitely was a great place to showcase a lot of some of them were older, but mostly current Disney characters of the time, and Peter Pan being a wealth of content to use for attractions and walk around characters. And even still to this day, Peter Pan is represented as one of Fantasyland's original dark rides. He had his own fly through over London on a pirate galleon, and still does to this day. You can still go to Disneyland, and the Fantasyland area has been remodeled throughout the years, but a lot of it is still very similar, and the idea is still fairly intact. And I've always found that attraction to be very neat. As you can see from the wait times in the line queue, it's often one of the most popular and longest lines. In addition to the dark ride attraction, you can often find Peter Pan, Wendy, even Captain Hook wandering around, and you can interact with them. And Peter's often causing some mischief. There's lots of fun videos online people have caught of some of those interactions, and those are always fun to come across. Even on Main Street, USA, Peter Pan is represented at the Lost Parents station.
Yeah.
At the
Yeah. Instead of lost children, it's lost parents.
Where you can see the darling parents anxiously wondering where their children are, represented on a sign. So it's
Yes,
fun that
because
even they utilize details from Disney films in something as simple as that. They could just have a sign, but they added an artistry touch to it, an artistic touch to it.
yes, for sure. And of course, Peter Pan takes place at the era of Main Street, USA.
So it
The
fits right in.
the play was produced in 1904, so theoretically that's when it's set.
Yep, and it shows off how they really try to take that extra care to detail to make sure everything is relevant, or at least they used to. I don't know so much about today at times, but
One thing you had mentioned to me before we were recording is that there was a Peter Pan area within Fantasyland that was not carried over into the new Fantasyland.
that's
That was
right.
in 1983.
Yep, that area was known as a few different names, but often was the Chicken of the Sea pirate ship restaurant, where you could go and order food, usually fresh tuna sandwiches and all kinds of stuff, and experience the ambiance of Skull Rock and the pirate ship. As you said, though, that attraction did not carry into the new Fantasyland remodel in 1983. There was a lot of deterioration in the wood that caused the ship to be a little hard to move and to keep intact. They do have some references in the new Peter Pan's flight ride where pieces of the old ship are visible. So keep an eye out for some of those artifacts from former days of Disneyland glory.
Yes, in the redesign of New Fantasyland, the Imagineers wanted to keep the Captain Hook pirate ship. There wasn't room for it in the redesign, but they were hoping to bring it back. But when they moved it had deteriorated and it just basically fell apart. To make a long story short, so that never happened. I think it was great to have Skull Rock there because there was water. Water always helps cool things off. So
Yeah.
that's missing now from Fantasyland. But they went toward an attraction. They made more room for Dumbo, which is a ride as opposed to just a pirate ship that you can walk around in and also have some food. But so something was lost and something was gained. That's often the way in these redesigns. But
I'm sure you got to experience it, Jim. Of course, that was before my time.
yeah, I just barely got to experience it.
That's amazing to me.
Yeah, it was a beautiful thing. But there's only so much room in Fantasyland. So again, the intent was to bring it back, but
There's
it
no
just
room.
there wasn't any room, and then they were going to figure out a way to do it, but the ship fell apart.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
So one thing I love thinking about, as always in any Disney animated feature, are the voices. Walt Disney was always such a master of casting, and even right down to Tinkerbell. Now, Tinkerbell, as Mark Davis always pointed out, was a pantomime character, but she did speak in a manner of speaking with the bell tones. And Walt himself had said that she should speak through the sound of bells. So her mouth doesn't move, it's just the sound that she makes. So certainly sound effects expert Jimmy McDonald was very involved in that. But they went a step beyond that at Walt's direction, and they signed on master bell musicians Bernard and Dorothy Mason. They came to the Disney studio with a vast selection of bells, and they were known as bell artists. They could make different sounds and different experiences, if you will, with the bells.
Wow.
So they created a vocabulary for Tink. Now, if you watch the film, she's not always speaking, even when you hear the bells, but there are definitely moments when she'll say something, not in words, but the sound of the sound of the bells, you can tell what she's saying. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, watch the movie and you'll see and hear. But it was these bell musicians that created this, and it was to the extent where just the recording of the dialogue portion of her bells took 6 days. So it was very, very extensive and a true mastery. But I also wanted to point out, among the many voice artists, Bobby Driscoll as Peter Pan, his last role for Disney, and Kathy Beaumont, wonderful as she was as Alice, now playing Wendy. But Bill Thompson, who was a big part of Disney animation in the 1950s especially, and he was a voice artist that was known, as many of them were, for radio. He was on the radio series Fibber, McGee, and Molly, and he played Wallace Wimple, so among other characters. So he had this kind of wimpy voice. Hello, folks. And then Tex Avery took that and created the character of Droopy, although Droopy in actuality is not wimpy at all, but took that voice. So you can recognize the Wallace Wimple voice that Bill Thompson used for the White Rabbit in Alice in Wonderland and Mr. Smee, but took that voice and created a different characterization for each of these characters. So Mr. Smee has an overlay of a British accent that we think of as the way the pirate would talk. But speaking of pirates, I think this is where Bill Thompson really shines, because Captain Hook's crew is quite diverse. There's a Scotsman, there's a Turk, there's all different kinds of different characterizations. Bill Thompson does the voices of all the pirates, not just Mr. Smee. So that first scene of the pirate crew, and when they're kind of fed up with Captain Hook and they want to stop chasing Peter Pan for heaven's sake and go out and do pirate things like find treasure. And they are teasing and being irritated with Mr. Smee because he, of course, is the first mate and he does what the captain says. And you can hear all the different voice characterizations of all those different pirate characters. And to me, that's where Bill Thompson, his versatility can really be experienced. So it's really fun. And then again, listen to Mr. Smee as opposed to the White Rabbit. It's the same voice, but it's a completely different characterization.
100% right. I actually didn't know that about Bill Thompson voicing the other pirates in addition to Mr. Smee. That's really fascinating, and I'll have to rewatch to catch some of his fun little variations. I totally believe it, though. He's a man of many talents. I love some of his other side works. One of my other favorite Bill Thompson characterizations or roles for Disney was Pigs is Pigs, the little animated short. It's just the one that comes to mind, but of course the White Rabbit too.
Well, I love you know Pigs is Pigs. Many Disney fans don't even know what that is. So
I invite you all to look it up, do your homework.
And of course, Bill Thompson is also the voice of the Little Ranger, also known as J. Audubon Woodlore.
One of the greatest Disney characters ever.
And again, it's that kind of Wallace Wimple voice, but a different characterization.
It's amazing how he can do that. And going back to what you said about Tinkerbell and not being able to speak, believe it or not, in another capacity, Tinkerbell talks through the testimony and experiences of the live action model, Margaret Kerry. She has a long career of doing work in various films or for various films and TV shows, but she is well known for her work as the live action reference model for Tinkerbell. She would perform some of the scenes for the animators, and they would take some of the actions and things that she would do with her body as she's acting out some of those things for the movie. And a lot of what you see on the screen was taken directly from the inspiration from Margaret Kerry. And in addition to her, they did some facial reference from a lady named Ginny Mack. I had the great delight and pleasure to actually meet Margaret Kerry at Disneyland, and she handed me this fun little card when I got to meet her. It's her little ad that she carried around in her purse, and I got the last one that day. It advertises her little website, Tinkerbell Talks, and she, I think, even has a YouTube channel she's pretty active on, where she
Yeah.
asks questions and talks about her experiences, and it's really neat to see a living, breathing legend. um, an event that I was at, they handed out this cool lithograph with original concept art of Tinkerbell by Mark Davis. And this lithograph is sort of an ad for an upcoming book by Mindy Johnson at the time, Tinkerbell and Evolution. And I had mine signed by Margaret Kerry herself, and she even posed for me as I got a picture with her holding it. That's always been a fun, neat treasure to look back on, and I even now have the book now that it's been published. It's a great history of Peter Pan, specifically on Tinkerbell, but it does have a lot of amazing Disney history in it as well. So it's a great read.
Yeah, I too have been lucky enough to meet Margaret Kerry a few times, and she's a great storyteller. So we'll put links to her various sites in the show description, and definitely check those out. I was also on sort of a panel with her on a radio show. With
Really?
yeah, with her and Bob Gurr.
How cool.
And me. So I was in an incredible company that day.
Oh wow, yeah. What a delightful woman she is. She's very bubbly and sweet, and really takes the time to talk to every single one of her fans that comes up and says hi to her. So if you ever get the chance to, I highly recommend going up and saying hi.
Yeah, and she does still do personal appearances. So that I believe she puts all that information on her website of upcoming things. And if you're on Facebook, she has a Facebook page as well. So she's really fun. And as you said, Dean, she also has a history, quite a history beyond Tinkerbell. One strong example that many people have seen, she's in at least a couple Andy Griffith Show episodes, but including the famous Christmas episode from the first season. So you can definitely see her in action there.
It's a great episode.
It really is. So, Dean, who is the voice of Captain Hook?
Yeah, Hans Conried was the voice of Captain Hook, and Hans Conried is a longtime veteran of Disney films. He was in Davy Crockett, and he was also in Ben and Me, but he was also the live action reference model for Captain Hook. Another fun little tidbit, kind of going along the lines of Peter Pan, is that in the Walt Disney Christmas show, Hans Conried plays the face in the magic mirror and speaks to Kathy Beaumont and Bobby Driscoll and Walt Disney and asks the children what they want to see. So I think that's always really fun to tie in all the Peter Pan actors.
Also, Bill Thompson is in that Walt Disney Christmas Show special. He's supposedly the nephew of the magic mirror, Willoughby, who's a handheld mirror and is quite incompetent. And the magic mirror, played by Hans Conried, gets very impatient with him. So the actors who played Hook and Smee are together on that special as the magic mirror and Willoughby, and it's very funny.
Almost playing a reflection, no pun intended, of Captain Hook and Mr. Smee. So it's really fun.
I think it's very interesting that you had mentioned, Dean, the long gestation period where that this film took, as some of the Disney films did. In this case, Walt had even talked about producing Peter Pan as early as 1935. In 1939, he obtained the screen rights. And of course, the film itself didn't reach the screen until 1953. And even though attempts during the 40s were made and some story development was done, Peter Pan was put in full production in 1950. But I think it's very interesting to note that one of the title cards, to paraphrase it, is Walt Disney Productions is grateful to the Hospital for Sick Children in London for their cooperation. That's because the rights to Peter Pan were given in an incredible charitable act by James Barrie to this hospital for sick children in London. That is in operation to this day. And to this day, they control the rights to Peter Pan. And anybody that wants to do a production of Peter Pan has to get their permission, and then they are paid royalties. And the royalties all go to the hospital and their care for sick children. It's called the Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children, or GOSH, as it's now known. But anytime you see a production of Peter Pan, whether from Disney, as in Peter Pan and Wendy, or a few years ago there was a live action non-Disney production, they have to obtain the rights from the Great Ormond Street Hospital. Actually, the copyright ran out. Peter Pan entered the public domain, I think in the 80s, but Parliament, because we're talking England now, being an English property, Parliament made a move to make an exception to the copyright rules so that the hospital would have the rights to Peter Pan in perpetuity.
Wow.
So even now, and apparently from now on, they will continue to benefit from the royalties, and that includes any merchandise, any books, any stories, anything at all that is Peter Pan. Any royalties go to that hospital. So it's quite a wonderful novelty almost that continues to benefit children, and that's of course exactly what James Barrie wanted. Rather than the money going in his pocket, he wanted it to benefit children, and so it continues to do.
It's very noble and charitable of him, and inspiring as well.
I agree. So there's so much more to talk about with Peter Pan. We could talk for hours and still not be done. So perhaps at some point we'll revisit this subject again, Dean. But for now, we'd like to thank everyone for watching. And he's Dean.
And he's Jim.
And we'll see you next time on Digging the Details.